Hello, my name is Don Stanko, and I'm a park ranger at Women's Rights National Historical Park here in Seneca Falls, New York. Today, I get to join you from inside the Elizabeth Cady Stanton house. It's the home of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her family from about 1847 to 1862. So it'll be a big part of her formative years in her life. She will have 4 children born here. When she moves here, she will have 3 children, her husband Henry, and they make a life here for about 12 years. And in that time, she will take on changing the role for women across America and eventually across the world here in this little house. She will call this house the center of the rebellion. So many people would come to visit her and see her here in this house, and so many of the ideas and the early activism of the women's rights movement will start here in Seneca Falls. So today I just want to share a little bit with you about both her development and how this house kind of shaped some of her early thinking and early activist work. So to begin with, this house predates her by a little bit. It was built in the 1830s and may have been joined together of a couple different houses. Eventually, some landowners in the area, the Bayard family, will put this house together on this spot and live here for a period of years. But they will lose much of their fortune in the Panic of 1839, leaving the house open for auction in the 1840s, early 1840s. The next landowner will actually be Elizabeth Cady Stanton's father, Judge Cady, and he will buy this land, buy this house, and eventually give it to his daughter in 1847. It's with Judge Cady that I always kind of like to begin talking about Elizabeth's life and her development. Judge Cady and his wife, Margaret Livingston, will have 10 children between the two of them. 4 will die in infancy, which is tragic but very unfortunate, very common at this time in American history and world history. There'll be 5 daughters and 1 boy. And unfortunately, the one son will pass away at age 20 of typhoid fever when young Elizabeth is only about 11 years old. This is one of the defining moments of her childhood and will shape multiple different things in her life. The first thing that really comes to is just the devastation of losing her brother, who was well loved and had a bright future ahead of him. But then too, the loss of a male heir in small town America is always a huge issue, both politically and economically and property wise. She writes of seeing her father sitting in a study with the lights off, kind of mourning the loss of a son, and she would curl up in his lap. She was about age 11 at this time, and she would tell him that she would do everything to be the son that they had lost. And unfortunately for Judge Cady, he would often say to her, "Oh, Elizabeth, if you only were a boy." But because of this loss, it will spur Elizabeth on to go to further her education far more than many other people will at the time. She'll study Greek, win awards in Greek. She'll study horseback riding. She'll go to a school that was all boys except for her. And then when she's older, she'll go to a finishing school, the Troy Seminary, which is pretty much as far as women of means could go at this time. Her father, thankfully, or luckily for her, was of means. He was a judge, and he had lawyers coming in and out of his law office learning the bar or passing the bar exam. And so she's also going to be exposed to a lot of that work and a lot of that education. It's actually from this office that we kind of get the second big formative story of her childhood. When she's a teenager, she'll go in to visit some of the lawyers that are training under her dad. And she tells the story of one of the young men who is really, sadly, kind of just joking with her. He's trying to be silly, but it's a very impactful thing that he says. And I like to tell this story because I think it puts our minds in the idea of just how bad women's rights were at this time. Very simple story. Elizabeth comes in, I think it's shortly after Christmas, and she has a brand new necklace on. And she is showing the necklace to the young men that she was friends with in the law office. A very simple thing that people do all the time. Hey, look at my new necklace, look at my new haircut, look at my new shoes, whatever it may be. But in this case, something kind of strange happens. As I said, the one young lawyer is kind of teasing her, and he turns to Elizabeth and says, "Elizabeth, if we were married, that necklace would be mine. You would have no right to it. I could take it from you at any minute. I could hide it away. I could throw it away. I could smash it. I could give it away. I could gamble it away. I could do anything with it, and there's nothing legally you can do about it. And that is a really hard thing to hear. We think of our property as being very special to ourselves and that no one should be able to take it from us. But at this time, the law is not on the side. For women, they did not own anything. Their husbands owned everything. Their fathers owned everything. If no father, their older brother or male heir would own anything. If a woman was given property by her father, she really wasn't. It was given to the son-in-law, or whoever she may marry at the time. And it's part of the legal framework that had built up. It's a tough part about it, but it really goes to some of these big issues that are happening at the time in terms of women's rights. Now, Elizabeth will eventually marry. She'll marry a man named Henry Stanton, who was a very exciting, interesting guy. She met him in her cousin's house. Gerrit Smith was an abolitionist activist and politician, and he will introduce her to Henry B. Stanton, who was a young abolitionist speaker. He would travel across America giving speeches for different abolitionist societies, trying to drum up support to end the institution of slavery. A very exciting, very dramatic, very good speaker, and he really captured Elizabeth's eyes. They will be married in 1840, and the first thing they will do on their honeymoon is travel to Europe, to London, to attend the World Anti-Slavery Convention, which was the first of its kind, getting delegates from primarily the United States and the United Kingdom to address the worldwide issue of ending slavery. And Henry Stanton will be a delegate there. But it's also a very formative moment in that at one of the other delegates there will be the famed Quaker abolitionist Lucretia Mott. And she will be refused admittance to the convention based on her sex. She's there as a delegate, and eventually, after a day-long debate, the convention will decide that no women can be delegates. They can sit in the back and be quiet. Elizabeth is sitting in the gallery watching this happen, and she's devastated to see this famed Lucretia Mott, who was nationally famous at the time, be pretty much disgraced and disrespected in this way is just shocking to her, especially when all Lucretia Mott was trying to do was advocate to end kind of the scourge of the 19th century, the institution of slavery. So it's a pretty dramatic moment. This is 1840, and in 1840, when these two women meet, is born the idea of having a convention here in America to address the issue of women's rights. Our convention here in Seneca Falls won't happen until 1848, and I like to say that, why did it take so long? Life very much gets in the way. Elizabeth and her husband will return to the States. Henry will study law with Elizabeth's dad, Judge Cady, to pass the bar exam. They initially move to Albany, and then they will settle in Boston. And Boston is a super exciting time for Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She will have the first of her first 3 children will be born during this time. And then she also is exposed to a lot of the really cool and neat and interesting abolitionist speakers in the area. William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, people like that will come through Boston this time, and part of Henry's work. But she also gets to see a lot of the other neat literary highlights of the time. People like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and Harriet Beecher Stowe. And Boston is very much a literary scene and abolitionist scene at this time. But in 1847, 1 year before the convention here in Seneca Falls, they will decide to move to Seneca Falls. It's a little uncertain why exactly they move here. The stated reason is they move here for Henry's health and to escape the New England winters. But I always like to point out too, this house that she moves into will be at that time owned by her dad, Judge Cady. And Judge Daniel Cady will give this house to Elizabeth, which is also interesting because he's actually giving it to his daughter through the deed and not to his son-in-law. So a couple interesting questions come up about that and all the different things that entail. But he gives her a check and says, go to it. She will leave her children in Johnstown with the in-laws, or with her parents. And Henry's off working for abolitionist movements and new political parties. And she will come to Seneca Falls to set up house. And quite honestly, part of this all plays into her greater development. When she first gets here, it's a super exciting time. She has a new house. She has money to spend on it. She gets to put everything in order and make it the way she wants it to be. And then her kids will get to come here. They're kind of living in the country and kind of fun, kind of on the outskirts of town. But then, and I'm going to use her term for it, it all kind of changes after about a month. Drudgery will set in, and the drudgery of small town life, the work it takes to maintain a family, servants, the food, dental, clothes, all those different things, and it really affects her mental health, and is definitely an eye-opening experience for her. In addition, she will get to know some of her neighbors, which I like to think play a little bit in her development as well too. There aren't too many neighbors right here, right around the house today, but at this time, and it's kind of on the outskirts of town, the closest families to her are 12 Irish immigrant families that live about 2 blocks away, and they would have been working in the mills and factories here in Seneca Falls. And this will play an eye-opening experience for her. First off, she has to make a bit of apologies when she gets here because apparently her older sons like to throw rocks in other people's windows, which was not particularly nice, and she had to go make the rounds of apologies and try to make up for what the sons had done. But part of this, she will then share newspapers and magazines that she subscribed to with many of the other adults. She will offer the gardens here to the children so they can go pick cherries and whatever else out of the garden. They have kind of free range of it, free roam of it. She's also coincidentally into homeopathic remedies, so she can help many of their families get through the typical illnesses that happen at this time. And she's a midwife, so she will be in many women's homes in some of the most intense and personal moments in their lives, helping deliver children. She also ends up playing a bit of a role of a policewoman. She tells stories of a drunken husband coming home and waking up the family, and she gets called out of bed, and she goes across down the street and grabs the drunken husband by the ear and takes him in the kitchen, sits him in front of a cup of coffee and says, you know, quiet, sober up, and done, and kind of calms everything down. And because of her kind of her education and her presence, and to be fair, a bit of her upper class presence, she kind of does this role fairly well and fairly quickly and kind of falls into it. Is it fun? Probably not, but it is eye-opening, and it's definitely showing her how other people, their struggles and challenges. Of course, this all comes to a head in 1848 when Lucretia Mott comes into the area, and when they meet again at the home of Jane Hunt, they will call for the first Women's Rights Convention. But that's not the end of the story here. Elizabeth will live here another 11 years, and during this time, she will shape and develop the women's rights movement. One of the most important things will also happen in Seneca Falls, and that is a chance meeting on the street corner. She'll be introduced to a young Quaker woman by a friend of hers named Amelia Bloomer on the street. And of course, that woman goes on to be Susan B. Anthony. And this is where we see the beginning of their friendship and their partnership, which will span 50 years. It's an amazing, amazing collaboration. Susan will come down from Rochester, a few hours ride by train down, and she will often come to visit. She honestly will actually have a room in every house the Stanton family lives in, and they can affectionately call her Aunt Susan. Of course, there's no true family relation. But when Aunt Susan would come down from Rochester, she would take the kids out, get them out of the house, quiet it down, and give Elizabeth the space and the quiet and the time to write. Many of the speeches given by Susan B. Anthony as she traveled across America advocating for suffrage and women's rights, those speeches are written right here by Elizabeth Cady Stanton for Susan. That is the formative part of their relationship. Elizabeth says it best when she says, she crafted the thunderbolt and Susan hurled it. Basically, Elizabeth is the writer and the pen. Susan's the voice, the organizer, the face of the movement on the road. That's where this magic is very much happening here in Seneca Falls. There's a famous quote from Henry Stanton, Elizabeth's husband, that when Susan would come to visit, she'd stand in the kitchen and stir the pudding. Elizabeth would stand there and stir up Susan, and Susan would stir up the world. It's just a beautiful part of their friendship and relationship that lasts so long. There's also a lot of little fun stories about the house and the family here. as they shape their experience. This is a growing family in small town America. Apparently, one of the other roles that Susan will also help Elizabeth with is childcare, taking care of the kids and making sure they got what they needed. Eventually, Elizabeth will have 7 children. So she comes here with 3 and she'll have 4 more. 2 daughters who also go on to be leaders in the suffrage movement as well in the 20th century. And they tell a lot of these fun stories of when Aunt Susan would come to visit, which I don't know was always super appreciated, because it sounds like Aunt Susan was a little bit sterner and stricter than Elizabeth, Elizabeth was known for being very jovial and laughing and giggly. But they would have to basically play umpires with all the children and try to keep everything in order. Some of the fun stories that come out of it is the one toddler will get tied to the roof of this building on the chimney by one of the other older boys who was trying to experiment. That same toddler will be tossed in the canal down here in a suit of cork as, quote, an experiment to see if cork floated, and thankfully it does. Don't try that at home, please. A lot of neat things. Elizabeth would also try to host get-togethers for neighborhood children, dances and readings, share newspapers, share magazines. In the outbuildings that would have been out here as well too, next to the gardens, they had a barn. She bought a billiards table for the older boys when they got a little older, just to give them something to do in the evenings and things like that. So trying to make that life for her family in the middle of this, this amazing changing environment that we have here in Seneca Falls. Of course, in 1862, the family will leave this house and they will initially move to New York City area, and then they'll live in New Jersey as well. The family has many stories of this time, but they'll then move on to those other spots as well too. This house will be sold off to other families. I think about 4 or 5 families will own this house at different times. Unfortunately, they do make their own changes to it. So some walls are moved around, some porches are added, some out wings are taken down. So today, the house that we have is a bit smaller than it would have been with Elizabeth's time. And as much as I love the story about the pudding, there is no kitchen here anymore. So I would always love to have a big pot of pudding here in the kitchen, but that is not to be. There's no kitchen. So there's a lot of neat things here in this house. The Park Service will acquire it about 1982. So from 1862 to 1982, it's about 120 years that it was occupied by other families. So of course there's a bit of difference. We did do archaeological work here to make sure we have the best understanding of where everything was, what the remains were, what the wall colors were, what the different textures would be, and as trying to be as historically accurate as possible. That being said, I do encourage you to come visit us, especially once we have this fully open to everyone. It's a great spot to see the spaces where they would have been living and the lives they would have been living here in this time as the movement is begun, and as Elizabeth called, as the rebellion as beginning. Thank you so much for joining us. Please visit your national parks. On behalf of Women's Rights National Historical Park, my name is Don. Have a great day.